For a long time, the middle class represented stability. Work hard, earn enough, buy a home, build a future. That was the deal. And for a while, it worked. But something has changed. Because today, more people are working harder than ever, yet somehow falling further behind. Not suddenly, not through one major collapse, but slowly enough that it feels almost normal. The cost of living rises faster than wages. Homes become harder to afford. Debt becomes more necessary just to maintain the same standard of life. And over time, the gap keeps widening. This is why so many people feel stuck. Not because they stopped working, not because they stopped trying, but because the system around them changed. And once that shift begins, the middle class starts to lose the one thing it relied on most: momentum. Because the system only works when progress feels possible, when people believe that effort leads somewhere. But once costs begin rising faster than opportunity, that belief starts to weaken. At first, it's small things. Saving becomes harder. Owning a home takes longer. Everyday expenses take up more income than they used to. Then, over time, bigger changes begin to appear. People delay families, delay buying homes, delay building wealth altogether. Not because they want to, but because keeping up now requires more than it used to. And this is where the pressure begins to build. Because while incomes rise slowly, the cost of assets rises much faster. Homes, stocks, land, education. Everything connected to long-term wealth starts accelerating away from the people trying to reach it. And the longer that continues, the harder it becomes to catch up. This is the hidden shift most people feel, but struggle to explain. Because on the surface, the system still appears functional. People still work, businesses still operate, money still moves. But underneath, something else is happening. The middle class is being slowly squeezed between rising costs and slowing progress. And once that pressure continues long enough, the structure holding the system together starts to weaken. Not through sudden collapse, but through slow erosion. And the dangerous part is, most people don't realize how far the shift has already gone. At first, the pressure doesn't feel dramatic. People adjust. They spend a little less, work a little more, push major goals further into the future. And because the change happens gradually, the system continues to look stable from the outside. But over time, the pressure keeps building. Because the problem isn't just that things cost more, it's that the things connected to long-term security are moving away faster than incomes can keep up with. Homes become more expensive. Education becomes more expensive. Healthcare becomes more expensive. And while wages do increase over time, they rarely rise at the same speed. That's where the gap begins to widen. Because the middle class was never built around extreme wealth. It was built around access. Access to ownership, access to stability, access to upward movement over time. But once the cost of entering the system starts rising faster than people can save, that movement begins to slow down. And eventually, it stalls completely. This is why debt becomes such a major part of modern life. Not always because people are irresponsible, but because more and more things now require borrowing just to reach what used to be considered normal. Homes are financed over decades. Education is paid off over years. Credit becomes necessary to maintain the same lifestyle previous generations reached more easily. And slowly, the system changes from one built on ownership to one built on repayment. Because once debt becomes the main path towards stability, people stop building wealth freely. Instead, they spend years trying to catch up to rising costs. And while that's happening, something else accelerates in the background. Assets continue to rise in value. Homes increase. Markets increase. Land increases. Which sounds positive unless you're still trying to buy into them. Because for people who already own assets, rising prices create more wealth. But for people still trying to enter the system, those same rising prices push ownership further away. And that creates a divide. Not just between rich and poor, but between people who already own appreciating assets and people trying to reach them. This is one of the biggest shifts in the modern economy, because wealth no longer grows mainly through work alone. Increasingly, it grows through ownership. And the higher asset prices rise, the harder ownership becomes to reach, which means effort starts producing smaller results over time. People work longer hours, take on more responsibilities, push harder financially, yet still feel like progress is slowing down. And eventually, that feeling spreads across the entire system. Because once enough people begin struggling to move forward, the economy starts losing confidence in the future. Not through panic, but through exhaustion. People stop expecting things to improve. And once that expectation disappears, the structure holding the middle class together begins to weaken even further. Because the middle class depends on one idea above all else: that tomorrow will feel more stable than today. But once people stop believing that, the system begins to shift in a completely different direction. And that's where the real consequences start to appear. By the time the consequences become obvious, the shift has already been happening for years. Because systems like this rarely collapse all at once, they weaken slowly, quietly, in ways people adapt to without fully noticing. Until eventually, the pressure reaches a point where the effects can no longer be ignored. This is when frustration begins spreading across the economy. Not because people suddenly stopped working hard, but because the relationship between effort and progress no longer feels the same. People do everything they were told to do: get educated, work consistently, save money, build careers. Yet more and more feel like stability keeps moving further away instead of closer. And once enough people begin experiencing that feeling at the same time, the system starts changing socially as well as economically. Trust weakens, optimism declines, long-term thinking becomes harder to maintain. Because people stop believing the future will reward patience the same way it once did. And that changes behavior across the entire system. Spending patterns shift, risk-taking increases, short-term thinking becomes more common. Because when long-term stability feels uncertain, people begin focusing more on surviving the present than building the future. And over time, that creates a deeper problem. Because economies rely heavily on confidence. Confidence that effort matters. Confidence that ownership is possible. Confidence that progress can still happen over time. But once those beliefs begin to weaken, the middle class starts losing the role it once played in holding the system together. Because historically, the middle class acted as a stabilizing force. It created consumers, homeowners, long-term savers, and people invested in the future of the economy itself. But when maintaining that position becomes increasingly difficult, stability itself begins to weaken. And this is why the decline of the middle class matters so much. Not just because individual people struggle, but because the entire structure of the economy depends on broad stability to function properly. Once too much wealth concentrates upward, and too much pressure builds below, the system becomes less balanced. And less stable systems tend to become more volatile over time. This is when economies begin experiencing larger swings, more debt, higher living costs, greater financial stress, more dependence on credit just to maintain normal life. And the longer those pressures continue, the harder they become to reverse. Because eventually, people stop trying to move ahead altogether. They stop expecting ownership, stop expecting stability, stop expecting the future to improve. And once that mindset spreads widely enough, the economy begins operating very differently from the one that existed before. This is why the middle class doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades gradually, through rising costs, slowing mobility, and a system that increasingly rewards ownership more than effort. Not through one collapse, but through continuous pressure over time. And the dangerous part is, most systems don't recognize the damage until the shift has already gone too far. Because on the surface, everything can still appear functional. But underneath, the foundation holding long-term stability together is slowly becoming weaker. This is what empire economics is about. Understanding the systems behind money, wealth, and economic pressure. Not just what changes, but why those changes reshape entire societies over time. If you want to understand where these pressures lead next, make sure you're here for the next video. Because once the middle class starts weakening, the effects don't stop there.